Imagine you are a child adopted by the forest, not taken, not lost, but gently, quietly, adopted, like a leaf falling into the patient cradle of moss, like a bird landing on a branch that has always waited. Imagine being held by silence that is not empty, but full of listening. The mountains of southern Spain do not speak as people do. They hum in stone and wind, in pine needles brushing against one another, in the hush that follows rainfall. In that stillness, a boy came to be. He did not remember arriving. The forest had no gates, no beginning or end, only endless moments of becoming. Perhaps he wandered from somewhere far below, where wheels turned on roads and voices echoed through alleys. But by the time the wolves found him, he belonged more to bark than to brick, more to root than to reason. They did not come with teeth bared. They came with eyes like embers beneath snow, calm and watchful. They did not claim him, nor reject him. And so he stayed. The forest grew around him like skin. He learned its ways not through lessons, but through time. Quiet, patient time. He felt hunger not as a punishment, but as a guide. He watched the wolves hunt, saw how they moved, how they waited, how they knew. He followed behind them at first, crawling, then walking, then running. Soft-footed, low to the ground. Careful. Nights were stories of their own. Curled in a cave carved by centuries of rain and wind, he lay with the pack, warmed by breath and body. Outside, the wind moved through pines like fingers through hair. Inside, he listened, not for words, but for patterns. He learned the meaning of rustling leaves, the sharp crack of a twig, the slow drip of cave water. In dreams, he saw things he did not know, shapes that were not stone or tree, voices he could not place, sometimes laughter, sometimes sorrow, a phase blurred like mist on a river's surface. He would wake with the ache of something forgotten but not gone. Years passed. He did not count them. The forest did not ask for age. His limbs stretched, his eyes sharpened, his hearing deepened. He could hear a bird take flight before its wings moved. He could feel the coming of rain in the weight of morning air. But questions came, soft and slow like the first snow that surprises even the oldest tree. Who am I? Not with panic, not even with urgency, just a quiet curiosity. When he looked into pools of still water, he saw not fur, but skin. Not a muzzle, but a face with eyes that searched, eyes that asked. He sat often now on cliffs and high rocks, watching the valleys below. Sometimes thin lines of smoke curled from distant fields. He didn't know what caused them, but they were steady and strange, like a rhythm he couldn't match. Once, on a still morning, he heard a sound like a bird but sharper, rising and falling. Music. It stilled his breath. He did not know the world beyond the trees, but he felt it, like warmth at the edge of shadow, like a memory you don't own but still remember. One day, he smelled them before he saw them. People, smoke, metal, things that didn't belong in bark or bone. He followed the scent, low to the ground, heart steady. And there they were, at the edge of the forest just past the thinning trees. They wore colors the earth didn't know. They moved differently, abrupt, loud. One of them laughed. Another held a glowing object that played sound, strange and beautiful. The boy froze, hidden, eyes wide. It was not the song of birds or wolves. It was something else. The ache returned, deeper now. He did not step forward, but he did not run. He watched until the light faded and the people left. Even after they were gone, the air hummed with something new. He touched the ground where they had stood. It felt no different, but everything felt changed. That night, he did not sleep with the pack. He lay beneath the open sky, wide-eyed, the stars cold and distant. He whispered, though he did not know what he whispered, nor to whom. Am I one of them, or am I still only this? He did not know. The forest offered no answer, only the slow sway of branches, the distant howl of something calling, not to him, but from him. The next morning came quietly with fog curling between the trees like breath made visible. It dampened the ground and muffled the usual calls of early birds. The forest seemed to hesitate, holding its inhale just a moment longer. The boy walked without a destination, his bare feet silent on the cold earth, the fog beating on his skin like dew on leaves. His body moved out of instinct, but his thoughts lagged behind, slow and unfamiliar. He was used to sensing things, danger, hunger, weather. But this was different. This was not something that could be smelled or touched. It came from within, and it felt like distance. Not from the forest, but from certainty. He stopped at a shallow stream, watching it slip around stones with quiet purpose. He crouched, dipping his fingers into the cold current. The water moved on, undisturbed. He leaned closer, looking at his reflection. It stared back. Not wild, not tame. Just a face. Not a wolf's. Not quite a boy's. Something in between. As the fog lifted, a new sound stirred. Not sharp like the day before, softer. A hum, steady, mechanical. He moved toward it, cautious. His body was low to the ground, like when hunting. But this wasn't fear. It was something older, like curiosity tied to longing. Through the trees he saw a dirt path. It cut unnaturally through the undergrowth, lined with crushed gravel and strange flat leaves. A vehicle sat parked at the edge, humming gently. No people nearby. The machine exhaled smoke from its rear, a slow breath that curled into the branches above. The boy circled it from a distance, eyes fixed, muscles tense. He reached out, one finger brushing the cool metal. It was smoother than stone, colder than water. It did not move, did not breathe. Yet it pulsed with something, presence. A story, perhaps, that he could not read. Something made, not born, something controlled. He sat beside it, not close, but near enough to feel the difference. His gaze drifted to the tire tracks behind it, lines in the earth, a direction. The thought came like a leaf on wind. Would they take me? Then another. Would I want them to? The forest offered no judgment, only the wind threading its fingers through pine. In the dream that night, he stood in a room made of light. It had no walls, but it was enclosed. No trees, but it breathed. There were sounds, low, murmuring tones like the forest's voice learned to sing. In the center of this space stood something smooth, glowing faintly. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He stepped toward it, unsure whether he moved or was drawn. A whisper rose, not from the object but from inside himself, a wordless understanding, a memory of language he had never been taught. He reached out, but woke before he could touch it. Morning came with mist once again. The pack had moved on, but not far. He felt their distance not as loss, but as space. Space for him to follow, or not. He stretched, his limbs long and wiry now, every motion like water flowing downhill. He listened. Not for the wolves, not for danger. For that hum again, the strange vibration he had felt near the machine. It was not there, not today. Instead, the forest offered its old songs, a woodpecker tapping a distant trunk, the rustle of lizards in dry leaves, the distant call of something large, passing through shadow. He walked, slow and without destination, the kind of walking that wasn't for finding, but for being. The earth beneath his feet shifted, pine to rock, rock to soil, soil to sand. He followed a stream for some time, its music guiding him as surely as scent once had. He stepped over roots like stepping across memories. Each one was familiar. Each one carried a silence. Then, by a clearing he hadn't seen before, he found it. A boot, old, torn at the seam, half sunken in mud. It didn't smell fresh, it smelled of rain and forgotten things. He crouched beside it, touched the leather, traced the laces with one finger. It was made, but it had been lost. Left behind. Like him? He sat beside it until dusk fell in folds of blue and gray. The light dimmed, the sounds changed. He felt the wolf's presence again, distant but real. A question floated in his chest, not urgent but persistent. What would they do if I walked away? Would they wait? Would they follow? Or simply watch and let go? The sky deepened. Stars emerged again, and with them, the same stirring in his bones, that slow ache for something beyond the branches. But there was no map, no voice calling his name, only the sensation of movement, of change, like the shifting of seasons. He did not return to the cave that night. Instead, he lay beneath a holm oak, its branches arching above him like ribs around a heart. He watched the stars move slowly overhead, and he imagined they were watching back, not to judge, but to remember. He thought again of the glowing thing from his dream, and how it had pulsed with his own breath. He thought of names and of what it meant to be known. He did not speak. The forest needed no words, but within him something slowly began to form, a shape, a thought, not yet whole, but real. It might become a voice, it might become a path, or it might simply stay there, soft and still, like the hush before dawn. And now, as you breathe with the rhythm of the night, and as your body sinks into the safety of rest, perhaps some part of you drifts too, through leaves and wind and memory, to where the boy sleeps beneath the trees, between what he has been and what he may yet become. The wolves were distant now, but not gone. He felt their presence like a drumbeat at the edge of hearing. They did not ask him to stay. They did not ask him to go. They simply were. He stood slowly, stepping away from the machine, back into the trees, back into the known. But the known no longer held him quite the same way. That evening, he did not hunt. Hunger was there, but dull. He climbed a familiar tree instead, one with broad branches that cradled him like arms. From there, he could see the horizon, a thin red line where the sun had slipped behind the hills. A star appeared, then another. He whispered again. This time, only a single word. He didn't know where it came from or what it meant, but it felt like a name. And though the night did not speak it back, something in the air acknowledged it. A soft stirring of leaves, a low, distant call. He slept with one hand pressed to the bark, as if to tether himself to the old world, even as his dreams carried him toward another. He woke before the sun, his body already attuned to the subtle shift in light that announced the day's quiet arrival. The grove was still, touched only by the breath of morning wind threading through high branches. He lay motionless, eyes open, watching, as the sky turned from ink to steel to soft gray blue. Around him, the world remained unchanged, yet within him, a weightless shift had begun, a tremor that lived beneath thought. He rose slowly, limbs quiet and lean, and began to walk not with urgency but with the patience of someone listening to things not yet said. The cloth he had found remained tucked near his chest. He did not look at it today. Its presence was enough, a small, silent tether to something unknown, but now undeniably part of him. He followed no trail, moved by instinct alone. The forest opened for him the way it always had, not with invitation, but with indifference. It accepted his passing, neither welcoming nor resisting. He walked beneath arching oaks and past thickets where deer had recently grazed. The signs were there. A broken twig, a patch of turned earth, the faint scent of hide. He noted them all, though he did not give chase. Hunger was not what moved him. Something quieter was. A need not of the body, but of the self. By midday he reached a ridge he rarely climbed, steep and exposed, with stones that shifted underfoot. The view from the top was wide, the kind of wide that made the world seem both impossibly large and intimately near. He saw the forest roll out below him in endless green breath, and beyond that, Far in the haze, the shimmer of something other. Fields, perhaps, or rooftops, or just the mind filling in what it could not name. He sat with knees pulled to his chest and stayed like that, until the sun bent low. Shadows gathered in the valley, stretching like slow fingers, and he watched them climb the trees he knew, the hills he had wandered, the paths he had once followed in the footsteps of the wolves. He wondered quietly, almost without words, if they watched him now, if they too sat somewhere just out of sight, still and breathing, remembering the shape of him beside them. He missed their warmth, not as comfort, but as rhythm. Their presence had been a heartbeat beside his own. Now, alone, he listened for something else, the faint pulse of his own becoming. He did not understand it fully. It was too new, too soft, but it was there. That night, he built no fire, made no shelter. He lay on the bare earth and let the cold remind him he was real. Above him, stars wheeled in slow procession, quiet and certain. He traced constellations he had no names for, but which felt familiar all the same. One looked like a path, another like a hand, another still, like eyes half closed in sleep. He watched them until they blurred, not from tiredness, but from the deepening weight of thought that had no edge. And as sleep finally drew over him like mist, he did not resist. He gave himself to it the way he had once given himself to the wolves, to silence, to belonging, to the great unspoken. There was a lake he had not seen before. Hidden deep among the hills, it revealed itself without warning, just beyond a dense thicket where the pines grew crooked from the rock, their roots like fingers grasping for memories in the soil. He had not been searching for water, but sometimes in the forest you find things when you stop needing them. It stretched wide and still, its surface smooth as stone, mirroring a sky thick with slow-moving clouds. The trees at its edges leaned slightly inward, as if drawn to their own reflections, or listening to the silence that lived beneath the surface. He stepped closer, slow, as always. His breath slowed with each pace, his feet soft on the moss-covered ground. When he reached the shore, he crouched, fingers tracing the line where water met earth. It was cold, not sharply, but with depth, the kind of cold that remembered snow. He cupped a handful and brought it to his lips. It tasted of iron and distance and stars. He sat then, still as a stone himself, and watched. Time in the forest was not counted but felt. The light shifted slightly, the air thinned. Dragonflies skimmed the surface in quiet zigzags. A single bird called once, then disappeared again into the hush. No wind, no movement but his own breath. And then something strange. Across the lake, a shimmer, faint, barely more than a suggestion of shape. It was not creature nor reflection. It moved like heat. But there was no warmth in the air. He blinked. It was gone. Or had it been there at all? He stood, slowly, cautiously, and began to walk the edge of the lake. The ground was soft here, old with fallen needles and silt. He moved without hurry, following the curve of water. The shimmer did not return. But as he walked, he noticed something else. Stones, placed in a pattern. Not accidental. Not natural. Flat, smooth. Forming a circle half buried in earth and time. He stopped at the center and looked around. The lake, the trees, the still sky above. It all seemed to hold its breath. He sat in the center of the stones, closed his eyes, and listened. What he heard was not sound, not voice, but memory. The kind that does not belong to you, but recognizes you all the same. He saw flashes behind closed lids. A hand touching water, laughter echoing in evening light, the outline of a fire. He felt warmth on skin not his own, and the weight of something gentle. Connection. When he opened his eyes, nothing had changed. Yet everything felt different. The lake was still there. The sky was still gray. But now he carried something with him. Not a thing. A knowing. Small and soft, but real. He stayed until night came. until the lake turned black and the trees blurred into the dark. He lay by the water's edge and watched the stars reflect, twin fires above and below. He traced one with his finger on the surface, watched the ripple move outward and disappear. No sound, no voice, only presence. And in that presence, a new kind of peace. The next morning arrived with silver light spilling gently through the mist, and the lake, once a mirror, now lay veiled in cloud. He opened his eyes to that pale brightness, not startled, not restless, only aware. Aware of the way the fog moved across the water, slow and low. Like memory returning through time, the stones around him were cool and damp. His breath left soft plumes in the quiet air. He sat up, slowly, without urgency. He did not remember falling asleep. Sleep, in this place, had come like fog itself, gradually, soundlessly, and with permission. The lake had watched over him, cradled him without question. Now it whispered, not in words, but in stillness. And in that stillness, he felt something not quite new, but long unopened within him. He rose and walked the shore again, each footstep gentle. As he moved, he found more of the stone circle, half submerged, others hidden beneath brambles or covered by creeping moss. Someone, once, had built something here, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to remember. He could feel it in the placement, the rhythm, the care with which stone met earth. This had not been a place of fear. This had been sanctuary. And so he stayed. For days, or something like days, he remained near the lake. The wolves did not come. He felt their absence like a thinning of sound, but not an emptiness. They had given him the space, perhaps sensing what he had not yet known himself, that there was a quiet unfolding within him, too delicate for the company of others. He spent his time gathering smooth stones from the shallows, placing them one by one into new circles, smaller echoes of the first. Each day, a new shape, a spiral, a line, a simple crescent, tracing the edge of the shore, not for meaning, just for being, just to mark that he had seen this place, and that it had seen him. He spoke no words aloud, but sometimes in the hush a sound would rise from his throat, low and breath-like, not quite human, not quite wolf, a tone born of both memory and curiosity. He did not force it. He let it come, let it fade, let it belong to the wind. One evening, just as light fell into gold and the lake turned to fireglass, he saw it again, the shimmer, this time closer, a faint outline on the opposite shore, not solid, not approaching, but watching. He did not move. He did not fear. He simply looked back. The figure did not speak, did not gesture, but its presence felt familiar, the way a forgotten song feels when hummed beneath breath. It stayed for some time, minutes, maybe more. Then it turned and faded, swallowed by the mist between trees. He waited. The lake returned to stillness. He did not follow, but something inside him rose, a quiet certainty. The forest, the wolves, the wind, they were part of him. But now there was more. The shimmer had not come from the lake. It had come from within, a reflection of something awakening, a direction not marked by trail or scent, but by intention. He lay that night on the shore again, one hand resting on a stone he had placed. And before sleep took him, he whispered to the dark, not a word, but a sound, shaped like a name not yet spoken, and the wind perhaps answered. He moved away from the lake when the light began to change in a way he couldn't quite explain. Less golden, more muted, as if the forest itself were gently asking him to continue onward. There was no urgency in the request, only suggestion, like a hand resting lightly on the shoulder in quiet understanding. The ground sloped upward into soft hills blanketed in ferns, where the air grew cooler and the trees taller, their trunks dark with age, their tops disappearing into clouds that hung low, almost touching. His steps were soundless now, not because he tried, but because his body had become part of the silence. With every breath, the world around him seemed to slow, to listen, to to draw nearer. In this part of the forest, everything was deeper. The shadows, the quiet, the dreams. He came to a place where the trees bent inward in a perfect circle, their branches meeting above in a woven canopy that let through only the gentlest threads of light. Moss grew thick here, like a living carpet, soft and cool beneath his feet. He knelt and pressed his palm against it, felt the subtle throb of life beneath, tiny, patient rhythms older than memory. He lay down then, slowly on his side, arms folded, cheek resting against the moss. He stared out across the circle, as if looking into the center of a thought. In this clearing, time softened, blurred. The air tasted faintly of lavender and damp stone. There were no sounds, but his breathing and the occasional delicate drip of water falling from high leaves above. As his eyes began to drift, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of peace, he imagined he could hear a song beneath the silence, not played, not sung, but simply there. A low hum woven into root and bark, the lullaby of the earth itself. Images floated gently behind his closed eyes, murmuring rivers, glowing insects, the eyes of an owl blinking slowly in the dark. None of it asked for meaning. None of it rushed. Everything simply was. A light wind passed through the treetops like a sigh, and with it came the soft rustle of leaves brushing against one another, whispering the forest's long, old language. He was not thinking anymore, not remembering, just listening, just being, a part of it all. A small breath in a breathing world. And as sleep began to gather in the corners of his mind, soft as dusk, he felt the presence of something kind, unseen, formless, but familiar. Not a voice, not a word. Just warmth, just stillness. Just the understanding that in this moment, nothing more was needed. Nothing more was asked. Only rest, only breath, only sleep. That night, while the forest slept in long exhalations and the stars blinked behind thin layers of mist, he wandered into a part of the wood that smelled different, sweeter, as if the trees themselves had steeped their bark in memory. The air was laced with something floral and faint, like the last trace of a dream upon waking. He followed the scent as one follows a story not yet told. The path was narrow, lined with shrubs that sparkled faintly with dew, though no moonlight touched them. It was as if the glow came from within the plants themselves, a soft shimmer pulsing faintly, rhythmically, like fireflies holding their breath. He brushed his fingers along a branch and felt no resistance, only coolness, like the feeling of water sliding down skin. Deeper, he walked, slower, until he reached a clearing where strange trees grew, tall and spiraled, their bark smooth and silver, their leaves long and thin like ribbons. Wind moved through them without sound, and in that silence, he felt as if he had entered not a place but a thought, long held and only now remembered. In the center of the clearing, a pool of perfectly still water reflected nothing. Not sky, not stars, only dark. He knelt beside it and saw no reflection of himself, only the suggestion of a shape, fluid, shifting, the way mist moves across glass. He did not fear it. He watched, and slowly the shape began to form, not a person, not a beast, but something in between. A story, perhaps, given shape by silence. It did not speak, yet he understood. This place had been waiting for him, not to test, not to teach, but to hold. He leaned forward and whispered into the water, not with words but with breath, a simple exhale like a promise. The surface rippled once, then returned to stillness. Around him the air warmed slightly, the scent of lavender again, and sage, and something older than names. He curled beside the pool beneath the ribbon-leaved trees, and let his body settle into the moss. The shimmer around him dimmed, not vanishing, but softening, like a lullaby retreating into its final note. And as his eyes closed, and the night folded itself around him like a cloak, he knew only this. that in some hidden corner of the forest there was a place that remembered his name, even if he had never spoken it. In the days that followed, the boy moved like mist, soft, silent, without boundary. He wandered through ancient groves where the trees grew so closely that their trunks merged at the base, rising together into a tangled crown of leaves that filtered sunlight into speckled gold. The air here smelled of age, of lichen, and forgotten rain. He drank from slow-moving brooks where the water glided over mossy stones like silk. He paused beside hollowed stumps that hummed faintly when the wind passed through them, as if some echo of the forest's first voice still whispered there. The birds in this part of the woods sang in loops, not songs, but spirals of sound curling into one another, drifting between branches and vanishing before they touched the ground. He listened without needing to understand. Listening was enough. There were no paths in this region, no footprints, not even animal tracks. Only the untouched quiet of a place that had not been disturbed for years, or decades, or maybe ever. And yet, nothing about it felt lonely. The quiet did not push him away. It made space for him. It stretched around his body like the arms of a being made of shadow and kindness. At night he slept on beds of fallen pine needles, soft and sweet-smelling. The canopy overhead flickering with faint light that might have been starlight or memory. The dreams here were deeper, not sharp or surreal, but long, like slowly floating down a river in the dark. In one dream he stood in a field of white flowers that swayed without wind. In another he sat at a table carved from stone, across from someone whose face was made of branches and flame. They did not speak, but he felt words pass between them. A slow agreement, a deep remembering. He would wake from these dreams feeling both lighter and older, as if the night had rewritten something within him. On the fourth morning, he climbed a hill he had never noticed before, covered in silver grass that bent underfoot like fur. At the top stood a single tree, wide and low, its branches arching like the ribs of a great creature asleep. Beneath it lay a stone, flat and smooth, with no markings, yet full of meaning. He placed his hand upon it. The stone was warm, not from sun, but from something held within, an echo, a presence. He sat there for a long time, watching the fog rise and lift, listening to nothing and everything at once. Time passed in slow breaths. The air thickened with scent. Juniper, rain-soaked bark, something faintly sweet like fruit left on the branch too long. The tree above him creaked, not as warning, but like a voice waking from sleep. Leaves fell, not many, just a few, drifting in spirals, brushing his skin as they passed. Each one felt like a touch from something ancient and kind. He gathered them, not out of need, but because they felt important, like pieces of a story that was being told around him in gestures rather than sounds. That night he built no shelter, made no fire. He lay beneath the tree, the gathered leaves clutched gently in one hand, and he watched the moon rise through the branches, round and soft, blurred at the edges like a memory caught in mist. As he drifted into sleep, he imagined he could hear footsteps in the distance. Not approaching, not leaving, just moving, steady and sure. Not a threat, not an invitation, just presence. And as the stars turned quietly overhead, he let himself fall fully into that stillness. Not to escape, not to forget, but to become part of it. And perhaps in some place beyond the waking world, the forest whispered back his name, slow and low and wrapped in wind, reminding him that even those without a past still belong somewhere. That belonging does not come from knowing, but from being. And being is enough. The morning was veiled in a kind of light that softened edges, branches blurred into sky, stones melted into moss. His own hands looked like sketches drawn in breath. He did not speak, for there was nothing to say. Words had become too narrow for what he was feeling. He walked slowly down from the hill, his bare feet brushing through dew-drenched grass that sighed beneath him. The forest had shifted again, subtly, as it always did. He never heard the change, never saw it come. One moment, It was one way. Then it wasn't. Now the trees grew wider apart, their trunks dark as ash, their roots coiled like the writing of an old script he could not read but somehow understood. A soft trail of feathers led him forward, not fallen randomly, but placed, each one pointing to the next like silent signposts from something unseen. They were not bird feathers. They shimmered faintly, as though they remembered the sky even while lying on the earth. He followed them without question, only with breath. They led him to a hollowed-out place in the land, a shallow dip, filled not with water, but with light. Not bright, not blinding. Just a soft illumination that had no source, like the color of a remembered voice. He stepped into it. The ground here was dry and warm, like sun held in a secret place. The air smelled faintly of honey, of crushed leaves, of something deeper, like distant thunder held behind a cloud. He sat at the center, and the silence gathered around him. Not empty, but full of listening. He closed his eyes. Images came, slow and loose, drifting across his mind like smoke. A hand reaching down into soil, a face turned upward into rain, a mountain carved not by tools, but by waiting. These were not memories. They were impressions, feelings shaped like moments. They passed without urgency. He let them go. And when he opened his eyes again, the light had faded. But he remained warm. A calmness had wrapped itself around his bones like a second skin. He stood and walked on. The next grove he came to was different again. No birds, no insects, just quiet. The trees here were white, pale trunks, pale leaves, pale bark that flaked like snow in slow motion. He touched one, and it did not feel like wood. It felt like moonlight turned solid. Beneath his feet, the ground was soft and springy, as if the forest here had exhaled and laid down to sleep. He lay down too, arms crossed over his chest, staring up into the pale canopy. The world was colorless but not dull. It shimmered with absence. He imagined for a moment that he had entered a dream within a dream where everything existed only in memory, and he was walking inside it. Perhaps he was not meant to change this place. Perhaps it was only meant to be witnessed, remembered, carried. And so he did. He stayed until his breath aligned with the silence, until his heartbeat slowed to match the stillness of trees that did not age. And then, gently, he left. That evening, a soft rain began. It was not cold, not heavy, just enough to dust the leaves and scent the air with the clean, round smell of renewal. He found shelter beneath a low stone arch, formed by two boulders leaning against each other like old friends. There, he made a bed of dry bark and sat curled with his knees to his chest, listening to the rain sing in the trees. Each drop had its own rhythm, some fast, some slow. Some fell in clusters. Others came alone. He imagined each one was a story, a falling memory from the clouds, a message in water. He drifted slowly, eyelids half shut, lulled by the cadence. In the distance, an owl called once, a sound like a question, unanswered. He did not feel the need to answer. Not everything needs a voice. Some things are best left as echoes. The forest understood this. It had taught him without speaking. It had held him without naming. And now, as his body softened into sleep, the stones beneath him warm from the day's breath, he felt the gentle truth settle into his chest, that sleep is not escape, it is return. To the deep roots of being, to the soft dark under all knowing, to the slow secret rhythm of the world that never hurries and never forgets. He awoke before the dawn, the stone shelter still holding the warmth of yesterday. The rain had stopped in the night, leaving behind a scent like open earth and soft ash. Mist hovered above the forest floor, coiling low, quiet, like thoughts not yet formed. He stepped out into it barefoot, his feet sinking lightly into the damp soil. The air touched his skin like breath. Around him the forest had changed again, not in shape, but in mood. It no longer watched him. It walked beside him now. Trees did not tower. They leaned. The trail ahead was not marked, but it opened gently, step by step, as if the land remembered where he was going before he did. By midday, he came upon a place that did not feel like forest at all. The trees parted in a wide natural amphitheater, its edges ringed with dark stones stacked in layered circles, as if placed there by time itself. The ground was covered in soft golden grass, untouched by shadow. In the center stood a single object, an upright slab taller than a man, covered in moss, its surface carved with symbols. He approached slowly, breath steady, heart quiet. The markings made no sense to his mind, but something deeper in him stirred, as if those shapes were not to be read, but to be remembered. He placed a hand on the stone. It was cold at first, then warm, then quiet. The silence deepened, grew denser around him until even the birds held their voices. His hand stayed there a long time, not holding, just being. And slowly he realized this place was not forgotten. It was remembering him even as he stood in it. A place where once, long ago, someone like him had come. Perhaps with the same silence in their chest. Perhaps with the same questions wrapped in wind. He sat at the base of the stone and time slipped its boundaries. Hours passed, or minutes, or none at all. He felt no need to rise. The sky turned silver, then deepened to violet. When the first star appeared above, he closed his eyes and breathed out slowly, not from weariness, but from fullness. That night, he did not wander far. He lay among the grass and looked up at the open sky, unfiltered, round and soft and infinite. Stars blinked in patterns that made no demands. The breeze brushed his face like a story half told. And sleep came not as descent, but as return. Not the falling of something into darkness, but the rising of something into stillness. He dreamed of a deer, not running, not afraid, just standing, neck tall, eyes ancient. It looked at him without question, then turned slowly and began to walk. He followed, not running, just near. They moved through landscapes that changed without effort, meadows filled with mist, rivers made of light, cliffs without wind. The deer stopped at the edge of a hill where the sun never set. It looked back once, blinked slowly, and stepped into the light. He stood at the edge, watching. But he did not follow, not yet. He woke with a single thought, not loud, not urgent, just present. I am still becoming. He whispered it aloud. The forest did not answer. It simply held him. He rose and walked again. The day felt lighter, as if something inside him had unclenched. He came to a grove where the trees grew in spirals, trunks curving inward toward an unseen center. In the middle, a pool, not wide, but deep, glassy. He looked into it and saw his own face, older than before, not by years, by knowing. He did not smile. He did not look away. He simply sat and watched his reflection shift with the ripples. And as the sun moved slowly above, as shadows turned their gentle arc, he whispered again, this time not in words but in feeling. And the water, soft as sleep, answered with silence. As he walked onward, the trees thinned gradually, giving way to a strange and open stillness. The ground beneath his feet was dry now, soft with ancient needles and pale dust, and the air held a kind of gentle weight, as though every breath carried with it a memory older than the mountains. He followed no path, and yet his steps seemed chosen for him, as though the forest itself whispered beneath the soles of his feet, telling him where to go. He entered a glade lit only by the sky, where the wind stirred in long, slow waves that made the tall grasses lean and sway, like sleepers shifting in their dreams. Here he stopped, drawn not by sight, but by a feeling that settled behind his ribs like the beginning of a song. In the center of the glade stood an object, a tall wooden frame, ancient and silvered by rain and years, its shape like a door but standing free, unconnected to any wall. It held nothing. No hinges, no panels, only emptiness. And yet it radiated presence as though it remembered all that had ever passed through it. He approached it with care, not out of fear, but respect. The air around it was cooler, stiller. He stood before it and placed his palm on the smooth wood. It was warm, not from the sun, but from memory. He closed his eyes and listened. Not for sound, but for meaning. And slowly he understood. This was a place where choices had once been made, silently, without ceremony. A place where walking forward was not about changing the world, but changing how the world spoke to you. He stepped through. Nothing happened. No flash, no sound. The air did not stir. But inside him, something tilted, gently, like a cup filling with water. The trees ahead looked the same, yet they shimmered at the edges as though their outlines were not quite settled. He walked on, each step quieter than the last, not from stealth, but from belonging. He no longer needed to look down. The forest would not let him stumble. He came to a place where the land dipped and gathered itself into a quiet hollow, soft with moss and tangled with fallen branches. Here, time seemed to hum in the roots, as if the very ground remembered every footstep that had ever passed this way. He knelt and placed both hands flat on the earth. It pulsed, faintly, steadily, like a heart. He rested his forehead against the moss, eyes closed. And for a long while he simply breathed. When he rose again, he moved deeper into the hollow until he found a tree unlike any he had seen before. Its trunk wide and split open like a book. Its center hollow, dry, and lined with bark as smooth as velvet. Without thinking, he stepped inside. It held him perfectly, like a cradle shaped by time. He sat, cross-legged, spine against the curve of the inner bark, arms resting on his knees. The world outside dimmed. The sounds fell away. And inside the hollow he listened to the dark. It was not empty. It was full of slow echoes, the kind that come not from voices, but from what voices leave behind. Feelings that don't have words, questions that don't need answers. He let them pass through him, like wind through open hands. He did not chase. He did not cling. He simply sat, and with each breath he sank deeper into a stillness that was not sleep, but something quieter. At some point the light outside changed again. He felt it, not with his eyes, but with his skin. A softening, a dimming. He stepped out of the hollow and found the forest covered in silver dusk. Mist hung low, turning the trees to silhouettes. The path behind him was gone. The path ahead was not yet formed. And he, standing between them, felt no need to choose. He lay on the softest patch of moss he could find and let the quiet wrap around him. Above, the branches moved in slow circles, whispering stories in a language older than sleep. And as his eyes drifted closed, and the hush deepened around him like water drawing over stone, he thought, without words, this is enough. This stillness, this breathing, this being. The night passed like a gentle tide, ebbing around him in rhythms older than words. He slept without dreams, not because there was nothing to see, but because the forest itself was the dream, wide and dark and cradling. When he opened his eyes, the sky was washed with soft blue, the kind that arrives just before the sun remembers to rise. He lay still for a long while, eyes tracing the way the light touched the undersides of leaves, the way the mist drifted low along the ground, curling like thought. The world was slow, quiet, honest. He stood without sound and walked forward. Not because he knew where he was going, but because the stillness called him gently onward. The trees ahead grew closer together again, tall and straight, their trunks like columns in a forgotten temple. The ground here was layered with old leaves, soft underfoot, and the scent of time lingered in the air, damp wood, faded bark, the breath of things long buried. As he passed beneath one great oak, he felt a shift in the wind, barely more than a change in the way it touched his skin. He paused, closed his eyes and listened. Far off, barely audible, there was a rhythm. Not footsteps. Not wind. A kind of music, slow and hollow, as if the bones of the forest were singing to one another in low tones that only the trees could hear. He followed. The sound did not grow louder, but it remained steady, like a thread tugging lightly at his chest. He stepped through thick ferns beneath arching branches, past clusters of mushrooms glowing faintly in the shade. Time thinned. The air grew cooler, and at last he reached a clearing unlike any he had known. It was not round, not open. It was folded into the land like a breath drawn inward. In its center stood a structure, wooden, curved, half swallowed by ivy and moss. It was not a house, but it had once been shelter. The roof had caved in, the walls tilted. Yet the feeling was not ruin, it was rest. He approached slowly. The doorway was narrow, framed in twisting vines. Inside, light filtered down through holes in the roof, catching dust in long golden lines. He stepped in, one foot then the other. The floor creaked softly beneath him. It was quiet here, even quieter than outside. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of things finished. He looked around and saw objects left behind, stones arranged in a circle, a small wooden bowl, a cloth folded neatly on a beam. Nothing moved, but everything waited. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, and placed his palms on the wood. It felt warm, faintly pulsing with memory, as if someone had been here just before him, just beyond the edge of time. He stayed there all afternoon, not thinking, not searching, only being. He watched the light shift as the sun moved beyond the roof beams, watched the golden lines turn to amber, then gray, then blue. The dust fell slower now. The air grew still. When the first star appeared in the open crack of sky above, he lay back on the old boards and exhaled. One slow, full breath. The wood beneath him held. The walls did not speak, but they listened. And as sleep reached for him, again, quiet and unhurried, he thought he felt the air brush against his cheek like a whisper, like a hand. And though no one called his name, he felt it spoken. Inside the stillness. Inside the dream. Inside the slow turning of the earth beneath him. When he woke, the light was dim and blue, the kind that comes just before the first birds remember their songs. The shelter was silent around him, wood cool beneath his back, the scent of earth and old ash hanging in the still air. He didn't move at first, just lay there blinking slowly, feeling how his breath filled the space, how it curled against the beams, how it softened the edges of silence. Something in him had changed during the night, though he could not name what. It was not pain, it was not peace, it was simply more. As if some piece of the forest had settled quietly into his chest. He stood slowly and stepped outside. The world was mist again, but not heavy. It hung just above the ground like memory, touching only the roots and stones. He walked without direction, trusting the same quiet pull that had guided him before. The trees were older here, bark thick and cracked like the surface of forgotten rivers. Their branches did not sway. They waited. He moved through them like a shadow, not a disturbance, not a visitor, a part of it. His body no longer asked for rest, nor food, nor warmth. It asked only to keep going, to keep listening, to keep finding the still places. He found a river, not wide, but fast, its surface dark and smooth like obsidian. It made no splash, only murmured. He knelt at its edge and dipped his fingers in. Cold, clear, honest. He drank, then washed his face. The water left his skin tingling as if it had carried a message. He sat on the riverbank for a long time, watching leaves float past, each one spinning slowly before disappearing beyond the bend. He felt like one of them, caught in a current larger than understanding, yet not lost, simply moving, simply trusting. By late morning, he reached a grove unlike any before. It was not quiet, it pulsed. The air vibrated faintly as if sound lived within the leaves themselves. He stood at the edge and felt it in his chest. Not music, not wind, a heartbeat. The trees here were thinner, paler, their bark almost translucent. Light filtered through in soft gold, touching everything with warmth. At the center of the grove was a mound of moss gently rising like a sleeping animal. On it rested an object, a small bundle wrapped in woven bark and tied with a thread of grass. He approached, breath steady. He knelt and touched it lightly. It was dry, light, familiar. He untied the grass thread and unwrapped the bundle with care. Inside, nothing, only air. And yet he felt the weight of it. He closed his eyes and held the empty bundle to his chest. For the first time in many days, he felt the sting of tears. Not from sorrow, not from longing, from knowing, from being held by something too large for names. He stayed like that until the wind passed through the grove, and with it, the faint sound of singing, not close, not clear, distant, software. A voice without words rising and falling like breath. He followed it, not far, just beyond the trees. And there he found a place where feathers lay in a perfect spiral on the ground. White, gray, brown. Placed, not fallen. He sat beside them, hands in his lap, and listened again. The voice had gone, but its echo remained, not in the air but in the quiet around him. He placed one feather behind his ear, another against his chest, and let the rest remain untouched. As night approached, the light turned honey-colored, soft and slow. He lay beneath a sloping willow tree, its long branches hanging like a curtain, and let the leaves drift across his skin. He breathed in the scent of the river, the moss, the faint sweetness of old bark. And as the sky dimmed, he whispered, not words, just a sound, low and round, the way the forest speaks in dreams. And sleep came, gentle as rain, folding over him without weight, without thought. Only presence, only stillness, only the long, slow breath of the wild wrapping him in its quiet forever. By morning, the willow's branches had gathered drops of mist that shimmered in the early light like forgotten stars. The boy awoke slowly, eyes opening not from urgency but from the gentle invitation of the day. The air was soft against his skin, the kind that feels like memory even as it unfolds. He stretched, long and slow, and sat up with moss still clinging to his elbows. Around him, the forest had returned to its still rhythm. Leaves swayed in patterns too quiet to notice unless you had learned to be part of them, and he had. He walked toward the sound of water again, but not the rushing river of yesterday. This was a softer music, the trickle of a spring that spoke only to those who paused long enough to hear it. He found it nestled beneath a curtain of ferns emerging from stone, clear and cold. He cupped it in both hands and drank, letting it coat his throat like song. The coolness traveled down his chest and seemed to settle somewhere deep, stirring something light inside him. As he moved on, the forest opened into wide meadows covered in tiny yellow blossoms, their petals trembling in the breeze like 1,000 quiet thoughts being shared without need for voice. Bees drifted slowly from one to the next, unbothered by his presence. He sat among the flowers, knees drawn to his chest, and watched them work. Time moved differently here. Not forward, not backward, just outward like ripples. He lay on his back and let the sun touch his skin through shifting clouds. High above, birds circled slowly, tracing invisible paths across the sky. He followed them with his eyes until the motion made him feel as though he, too, were rising, untethered, slow spinning into the light. He did not sleep. Not fully. He drifted in that soft place between waking and dreaming, where thoughts are less like language and more like scent or color, or the feeling of wind on skin. In that in-between, he saw images. A mountain that opened into flame, not fire that burned, but one that sang. A face, again, the same from long ago dreams, no voice, but eyes that knew. And a shape of light that curled around him, not tight, but close, like arms without pressure. When he opened his eyes again, the clouds had thickened, and the meadow was cast in soft gray. He stood and continued walking. By late afternoon, he came to the edge of a cliff that looked over a valley so wide and distant It felt like the end of the world. Below the trees stretched endlessly, a sea of green waves rising and falling without motion. He sat on the edge, legs dangling, the wind pulling gently at his hair. It smelled of stone and sky. He stayed there long, simply watching the colors shift as the sun fell. Gold into rust, rust into blue, blue into the quiet black of coming night. He lit no fire, ate no food, just breathed, just watched, just was. When the stars began to appear, first one, then another, then all at once like seeds scattered across black silk, he lay down on the cool stone and folded his hands behind his head. Above him the sky turned wide and full. He traced constellations with his eyes, not by name, but by feeling. One reminded him of the lake. Another, of the wolf who had once pressed close to him in sleep during a winter night so long ago he wasn't sure if it had been real or only wished for. The stone beneath him was hard, but it did not push against him. It welcomed him, gave shape to his body. The air moved gently over his skin, and the sounds of the valley below became a lullaby without melody, just the layered hush of leaves, wind, and distant water. And slowly, breath by breath, thought by thought, he gave himself to the dark. Not because he was tired, because he was full, because he had listened and wandered and remembered, because sleep at last felt like belonging.